Hi there, I'm going to show you a little demonstration on using acrylic paints and how to use them at home or in the classroom. Wherever you're using acrylic paints, know that they are a permanent paint. They are not easily washed out of your clothes or tabletop, so always put a piece of paper underneath you. I like to have a paper towel ready. I use anything I can find for a palette. I like to use these deli trays. And I can slide them in a Ziploc bag when I'm done to keep them fresh, or put them in a container. But if you don't have that, you can also use a paper plate or a piece of cardboard, whatever you want to put your paint on. And if you can save it, even better. You can paint on many surfaces with acrylic. Paper works well, cardboard, cereal boxes, any type of kind of smooth material you can paint on. Even newspaper or magazines you can use as painting surfaces for acrylic paints. It works on wood, some plastic, and glass. So basically, if you can find something to paint on with acrylic, you can paint on it. You are going to need to use some brushes that are a little bit stiffer. When you use brushes with acrylic paint, you want to make sure that they can hold the paint, because the paint we use for painting is called heavy body acrylic. So you want the bristles to be stiff enough so that they can hold the paint, versus watercolor brushes, which are usually really soft and kind of like little mops. You're going to need some water. Whenever you use acrylic paints, you don't want to use them right out of the tube because they won't go very far. So you have to thin them with a little bit of water. Even if you're using it thick like an impasto, which I will show you, I-M-P-A-S-T-O, I want to show you how to mix your paints together and how to thin them, how to clean them up, and anything else that goes along with acrylic paints that I might think of. Acrylic paints are permanent. They are a polymer emulsion. They are basically a plastic that has been basically combined in a solution, and they're really fine little plastic particles. So they don't break down very easily, but they will break down enough to wash your brushes out with soap and water. Also, if you get acrylic paint on your clothing, wash it out with soap and water right away before it dries. It seems to be impossible to get off once it is dry. You don't want to put a lot of acrylic paint down the sink, because that could eventually clog the drains, because it is a plastic type material. So if you're going to be done with this, throw this away. It will dry and you'll be able to peel it off too and reuse your tray, but for the most part I save it as long as I can. All right, so a couple things with acrylic paint. I'm going to use this brush, get the little water on the brush. I'm going to show you an impasto first. So a lot of times acrylic is used on canvas because it's a pretty sturdy material, and canvas can also be hung right on the wall when it's done. So impasto means to be thick paint. So I'm going to put blobs of thick paint with texture on them, like that. And what's cool about acrylic paint is if you're using colors that you know are similar in the color family, meaning that they are neighbors on the color wheel. So right now I kind of have this yellow ochre or this yellow orange. I'm going to move over to the reds. I know that these colors that are neighbors, wherever they are neighbors, are going to blend really well, and they're going to make those colors stand out even more. So I can mix a different color using impasto. I'm using these big brush strokes, and you can see the texture stays with these acrylic paints, and it'll dry like that too. So you can get really thick looking texture. You can do different swirls in there. Vincent van Gogh, Starry Night, was pretty famous for painting with thick. A lot of the Impressionists are also painting very thickly on their canvases, just to get that extra texture in there. Okay, so that's really thick paint. And sometimes when I paint like that, I like to already have the background painted a certain color. I always would think I would do the opposite color on the color wheel, so that way the colors on top really pop. So if I knew I was going to do a lot of reds and oranges, I would go across the wheel and do like a green background, and that would really intensify those colors. This is part of how the color and the color wheel works. Okay, so that's impasto. I'm also going to show you an opposite of that, which is called a glaze. Now glazes are hard to get with acrylics. It's probably the hardest of all paints to get a glaze. Glaze is really, really thin. Think about when you glaze over like a steak or something like that, you're gonna just put a little bit of the juice on top of it, let it kind of dry out, put a little bit more and keep doing that. That's the same thing with paint. So you're gonna use more water this time. We're gonna pick our color and we're gonna really thin it out. On my palette here, I have like a warm and cool color of each of the three primary colors. The three primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And then there's a warm version. There's a warm red and a cool red. This is more of like a magenta. There's a warm yellow and a cool yellow. This one's a little bit more on the green side. So a little bit more over here towards green. And then I have a warm blue and a cool blue. Here's my warm blue, a little bit closer to red, and my cool blue. Okay. And the reason I have that is I can mix a lot of colors by using those. So I usually like to have two of each of the primary colors and then a white so I can make my tints. Here's a glaze. I'm gonna do a thin wash of this. Okay, and I said these are really hard to do with acrylics. They're mostly done with watercolors and oils because you can really thin out an oil paint pretty easily. But we do our best if we want that look, a watercolor washy look with an acrylic, you can do that. I'm gonna let that dry, and acrylic paints take, depending on how thick they are, this could take 5 minutes to 10 minutes to dry. Something like this could take 30 to 60 minutes or more to dry, depending on how thick you lay the paint. Okay, watercolors are gonna dry much faster, and oil paints typically much slower. Sometimes it takes weeks or months for really thick oil paint to fully dry. So that's kind of a benefit of using acrylic, is because it's kind of in the middle as far as drying time. It's pretty easy to wash up and you can get a lot of bright colors with it. All right, another thing I'm gonna show you is I'm gonna make some values. I'm gonna go from dark and I'm gonna go to light. Now, because I know this blue is very intense, I'm gonna kind of get rid of some of that on my paper. If you ever need to get rid of some, an old sponge or a paper towel works.